can get most of the attendance through the log. Next slide. All right, so today's topics include a variety of quick updates, including where we're at with the continuing review, an update on all of our contracts for the last part of this year and next year, a little bit about a data lock and getting data entered in January for that, a note that we'll be piloting to look at engagement of clinicians in the recruitment and consent process, a little bit about site activation and recruitment and where we stand with that. We've had a lot of questions about patient status. Are they in the study? Are they out of the study? Are they screen fails? Sort of what that all means, and we'll give you a framework for that, and then a few general reminders. Next slide. So first, thanks to all of you for responding to Stephanie Sullivan's many emails and getting her what she needed for the continuing review. Everything was submitted to the IRB in the beginning of the month, and hopefully by the end of the month, we will have new letters to send out to all of you that we are good to go from the IRB perspective for another year. And new consent forms and assent forms will be sent to each of the sites as part of that package. Next slide. In terms of contracts, Cincinnati Children's is working on getting your contracts out by the end of December. There will be a couple of clarifications with the new contracts. The first is clarifying that sites are only paid for attendance at the one community conference that we piggybacked the site training on, if that is applicable to your site. We did that at the spring conference 2 years ago and at the fall conference and the spring conference last year. We are going to clarify that for patients who, for sites who have enrolled more than 15 patients. That's great. High five, let us know, and we will give you approval to continue recruiting. And then for each increment of 5, let us know, and we'll give you another high five and approval to keep on keeping on. And we are adding further clarification that allows us on a contractual basis to pay you all for the patients that you consented and wound up being screen failures. We don't anticipate that that's going to happen a lot because most of the inclusion-exclusion criteria can be assessed by chart review prior to consent, but sometimes the liver enzymes come back after consent and they're elevated or something along those lines, and you've gone through the work of consenting that patient and putting all of that data into the database, and we will pay you for all of that work. Next slide. We will be having what we call a soft database lock on January 31st to allow us to do a little bit of data cleaning and prepare for the next data safety and monitoring board meeting in the early spring. As a reminder, this is a process that we do twice a year. All of the visits that occurred prior to January 1st, this should say 2018, must be entered into the database by midnight on January 31st, 2018. So let's get as much recruitment and follow-up in prior to going on break for Christmas, New Year's, and the other winter holidays. When we come back in January, let's do the mad dash to get everything up until December 31st or January 1st entered. In the next couple of weeks, you'll be receiving a list of outstanding data items. Keep an eye out for that and plan some time to respond. And if you want to be super proactive at your site, you can use the exceptions aging report to get a jump start on identifying which data items are missing from your site. If you don't know how to use the exceptions aging report, send a note to Michelle JP or me, and we can connect you with our data team to give you a tutorial. It's a really useful report. and we continue to fix the bugs and glitches that are in it. And if you notice a bug and glitch that needs to be fixed, let us know, and we will hop on that. There may be some data or visits that are just missing, or we're never going to reclaim. A lab test that just wasn't ordered, or a visit that just didn't happen in window, indicate that that is permanently missing on the data query, and then that is a minor protocol deviation to be added to the log. No biggie, but we just need to log it. Next slide. We will be sending out a letter to many of the coordinators over the next week or two. We'll start off with 7 sites, and then we'll sort of make sure that the instructions are clear prior to sending it to the rest of the sites. And the goal is to gather some information about your site and about the clinician involvement at your site to support recruitment efforts. I know a couple sites got that letter earlier this week. Next slide. Some updates on site activation and recruitment. We have now selected 41 sites. We've added in a few extras over the last couple of months. Emory was our most recent site, and they are in the process of getting activated along with the other recently accepted sites. And we've got a few sites from the first 2 rounds that are super close to activation. 2 will be ready to go in January as soon as the continuing review comes through. And then the rest are sort of in process. As of, I believe, a week and a day ago, we had 102 patients randomized. So we have surpassed our 100 milestone, which is amazing. Thanks to all of you for your great work. 26 sites have recruited at least 1 patient, and I think all sites will agree that getting the first patient in is the hardest part, and after that it becomes successively easier. And Cincinnati and Norfolk remain our lead sites. Next slide. Here's a graph of our recruitment. The top line is our ambitious goal, and the bottom 2 lines are the number of patients consented and number of patients randomized. And the difference between those 2 are some patients that are consented but not yet randomized, and some patients who are screen fails. But as we discussed earlier, there are fortunately very few screen fails by the time we get to the consent phase. So again, we are definitely increasing our velocity of recruitment, which is good. We remain behind schedule, but that's okay. We can keep on keeping on. And I think with a 1-year extension, which I hope will be possible, we should be able to meet our target. I put in a newsletter a couple weeks ago, but I was thinking sort of what other randomized controlled clinical trials have we done in our pediatric IBD space? And the only other one that came to mind was the Markowitz 6MP study, which included 55 patients total. So we definitely are making history with Combine. Next slide. This is a summary of recruitment by site, and again, it's nice to see that the sites on the left continue to get more and more patients. I didn't realize this, but this may be even more updated than the last slide. CHKD may have 11 and have taken the lead. And again, we see a smattering of sites over to the right with 1 and 2 patients, and I love the fact that this graph is getting wider and wider as we have more and more sites activated, recruiting, and joining our efforts. Next slide. So we've had a number of sort of questions and clarifications around sort of who's consented, who's withdrawn, who's in the study, who's not in the study. And we've put together a draft SOP that we'll be sending out later this month to clarify all of this, but I wanted to give you a sneak preview. essentially every patient that has been consented will fall into one of four categories. Either they are screen fails or by chance randomized inappropriately, or they are active patients who are still in follow-up. Again, we have a 2-year follow-up period built into the study. And those active patients are divided across a couple of categories. They're the patients that are just plugging along, doing well, have not met any of our endpoints that would indicate a treatment failure. They remain on drug. They get shipments every 6 months. We see them according to the study protocol, and all is well. We have the group of patients who have met a treatment failure outcome. Either they never got into remission, or they subsequently relapsed from remission, or had a hospitalization or surgery for IBD, or prolonged steroid use, or whatnot. These are patients who have met our treatment, our primary outcome of treatment failure. We do what we're supposed to do, which is stop study medication, but continue to follow those patients for our entire 2-year follow-up period. And then we have patients who withdraw for some other, we have patients who stop drug for some other reason. They change their mind, their provider changes their mind, they're doing fine. There's no medical reason to stop treatment, but for some reason it's stopped. And those are patients who we encourage to remain part of the study for the entire 2-year period, if at all possible. And indeed, we can pay you for following those patients for the entire time period, even if they are no longer on drug. We're not budgeted to pay you guys a ton, so it would be great, and we know you do a ton of work for recruitment, so it would be great for you all to follow those patients for the entire 2-year period so we can pay you accordingly. Then there are patients who early terminate the study prior to the 2 years of follow-up for a number of reasons. They move out of town. They just say, you know what, I've changed my mind. I want nothing to do with the study anymore, or whatnot. We'll cover that on a subsequent slide. And then we don't have any yet, but soon enough we will have patients who complete their 2 years of follow-up. Next slide. So a little bit about screen failures. There's definitely been some confusion over this. When a patient signs that consent form, this should be indicated on the pre-consent log, and the patient should be entered into the Combine database. And if while you're doing that process of screening, it becomes noted that the patient is ineligible, then he or she becomes a screen fail. If that happens, that's okay, indicated as such in the Combine screening visit data capture form. If they withdraw consent, again, they're treated as a screen fail, and indicate that on the Combine CRF. Once they're consented, don't go back and change the pre-screening log if you notice that the patient is ineligible. As soon as that patient signs consent, then we move from the pre-screening log to the Combine electronic case report form. So no need to go back for a patient that's screen failed and mark them as ineligible on the pre-consent. Once they're consented, then the workflow shifts entirely to the Combine database. Next slide. There have been a couple of patients who were near misses where they were randomized inappropriately, and that was caught prior to the first shipment. Essentially, the site made a mistake and randomized a patient that didn't actually have Crohn's disease or had elevated liver enzymes or whatnot. Or occasionally the eligibility of a patient changes overnight. Sort of between the randomization and the shipment of drug. We had a patient who, was randomized one day and an hour later developed an infusion reaction, and so the infliximab was being stopped, and so that patient sort of lost their eligibility super quickly. So all of those patients essentially become screen fails. There's a data change process that we have in place to do that. You'll have these slides as notes, but basically there's a form to fill out that you can find on SharePoint. You send that in to us, and we will work with you to open up that visit so that you can change the eligibility and indicate that that patient was a screen fail. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that there are a couple statuses of active patients who we're still following for the 2 years, those that are doing well and have not met an outcome of treatment failure, those who have met an outcome of treatment failure and are off drug, and those who decide to withdraw for some other reason. In order to prompt the off treatment status, you all need to go into the Combine database, go to the dose change case report form, and indicate that you are stopping treatment and what the reasons are. And this is something that the provider must e-sign. Next slide. And again, we do not anticipate that this will happen a lot. We actually hope it never happens, but there will be a small number of patients that withdraw consent. And for this, it means that the patient chooses to no longer participate in the study. That means stopping study treatment and stopping all other IRB approved follow-up aspects of the study, so that you are no longer entering data on visits, you're no longer collecting patient-reported outcomes, we're no longer paying you to follow that patient because they have completely withdrawn consent. And if that happens, just like the other categories, they become an early termination. There is the early termination form to complete. Next slide. In terms of early termination, here are the other categories of early termination. The withdrawal that we just spoke about, loss to follow-up, death, which I hope will never happen. And then there's another category to encompass all of the things that are totally unpredictable but ultimately happen in this study. And again, to prompt that early termination, find the appropriate case report form, indicate that the patient discontinued the study and why. The study provider must sign off on that process, and you also need to complete a dose change form so that so that patients who are early terms do not continue to receive medications from the pharmacy. Next slide. And then, of course, and soon enough, we'll have patients whose status is completed, which means that they have done their final study visit, which is visit 10. And the action for this is to go to the completed portion of the completion/early term CRF and indicate that everything is done and that that patient is golden. And this is something that the provider signs off on as well. Next slide. All right, shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to discuss what happens when patients get new shipments. And so as a reminder, every 3 months, the central pharmacy will contact the family and send them another batch of medications. This happens automatically as long as patients continue to be seen and providers continue to complete the provider review that indicates that it is okay for the patients to stay on medication. This process is discontinued if the patient is not seen in a 6-month period. It may well happen that the patients receive the next batch of study medications while they still have some of their first batch remaining. This is true of any sort of mail order pharmacy process where you may get the automatic refill prior to being done with your current meds. In this case, the patient or family should bring the unused meds from the prior shipment to the study center at the next visit, give them to the coordinator, and the coordinator will count the number of unused pills across each of the classes of medications, the methotrexate or placebo, the Zofran or placebo, and the folic acid, record those pill counts in the reconciliation form in the electronic case report forms, and destroy the medications according to the processes that your site has worked through. If you have any questions about those processes, send Michelle JP a note and we can help you there. And then the patient can start taking the medications from their next shipment immediately upon receipt. So patient gets shipment 2 in the mail, they still have some meds from shipment 1, they start taking shipment 2, they take the leftovers from shipment 1 back to the site, who counts, reconciles, and destroys. Next slide. Just some quick reminders in our last few minutes. We have changed our communications strategies a little bit. We have a expanded newsletter that I hope is useful and helpful to you. We promise to keep it 2 pages or less. Please do read them, and there are links to more detailed recruitment data on the SharePoint site. We are sparing you all of the gory details of the recruitment data at each site and between sites, but if you want them, you have a link to access them. We will be having monthly PI coordinator calls like this. They are important to attend. Thank you for calling in this morning. They will be recorded and posted to SharePoint in the event that you have to miss one of our month's calls. These calls are mandatory for both PIs and coordinators, so please do call in person, but at the minimum, you can review them on SharePoint. And when possible, we will piggyback in-person meetings at community conferences, although I believe we will not be having any combined related meetings at the spring conference this year because I have a soccer tournament to go to. Next slide. And this one I'm not going to go through. It's the same slide from last month's call, and it's just a reminder of who's who and who's doing what as part of our combined team. You know, whenever you have questions about anything, you can always direct them to Michelle Jeffcott-Pera or myself, and we can triage and get you to the right person promptly and efficiently. All right, and I think that's it for today. Thanks, as always, for calling in and for all of your hard work on this study. I think we are definitely making really good progress. So I'll stop here and hang on if anyone has any questions. Again, happy if you wanted to contact me or Michelle JP and hop on a call to clarify anything, we can always do that.
Thank you.
That sounds like Zarella. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Sounds like that people are dialing off, so thanks, Mike.
Yes, yes. I know we had 20 or 30 callers, so I was pleased with the attendance, and let's have a good week. As Dick would say, happy trails. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.